Hello, this is Dr. Garrett Castleberry, Program Director for Communication, Media, and Ethics here at Mid-America Christian University. I am here with our COM 2113 Media Culture and Social Influence Week 3 video lecture series. In week 3, we are discussing and reading about semiotics primarily, and we have been putting it into practice already. This ties into some of the analytic work we are performing with those midterm written analyses, a comparison analysis using two media texts, and thus the week 3 emphasis on semiotics can help give you some of the raw materials, some questions even if we don't have all the answers, to developing our critical thinking skills about media texts. Not only their raw materials, but what messages are encoded in those texts, and how might we use our personal experiences, our perceptions of the world, as well as our research skills to decode those texts. So we are here for a video Q&A lecture, and that means it's time for the asynchronous dialogue. That's right, a dialogue that exists in and outside of space and time. Questions have come in and gave them a look over. We don't have time for all of them today. Very busy schedule. I wish we could create that pocket universe and simply go in there and dwell on the questions and stimulate some responses ad infinitum. But alas, we'll see how much we can fit in. Questions of the Week award. It might be a tie, but definitely sharing the valor there. Juanita's questions, looking at Berger's Messages, an Introduction to Communication, Chapter 3 on Rhetorical Methods for Analyzing Texts. The question comes up: how is knowing the genre of a TV show or movie ahead of time, how does this affect or increase our gratification? And of course, this is borrowing some of the terminology from one of our early readings. When we look at media theories, one of those theories is uses and gratifications theory. So the question is, how does knowing about a particular genre's conventions or formulas or tropes, why would that be important to abetting the experience, the gratification of taking in that text? And it's a great question, an important one when considering each of the themes we've covered. And of course, this short course, we are using a genre to stimulate our general discussion in a focused direction, but it's a focused direction that when we get to the other end of things, we can blow up and put toward any other number of directions where it applies. So in thinking about a genre, what kind of value does it add to the gratification, the experience level? And I think it does add value, right? Because, for example, let's say you are a fan of the rom-com or the romantic comedy movie, right? Movie feature. And so anytime you go in, it is already predisposed that you are going to get certain storytelling elements out of that viewing experience, and those thus form the foundation of expectations. Not just audience expectations, but because the entertainment industry is a business model, these become consumer expectations, all right? And so there's that old saying, you get what you pay for. Well, oftentimes the audience wants what they pay for, or else they become disgruntled and so on. So if you came into a romantic comedy and it was not quite fulfilling the tenets of perhaps the happy-go-lucky, the lucky in love, even the unlucky in love, the romance aspect, then you are likely to have an adverse effect to that genre of interest. An example that comes to mind of the romantic comedy genre, and not claiming superiority over this genre, but I appreciate that we like diversification in this class, is Oh, I can't. Oh, I'm coming. This example just came to mind, so I haven't had a moment to look it up. But there was the um, romantic comedy, although it's a false label, with Jennifer Aniston and Vince Vaughn. Okay, and the breakup, is that what it's called? Whatever the title was, I think people based on, let's say, the show Friends, as well as some of the early work with Vince Vaughn involved comedies as well. There is that perception that, oh, this is going to be a romp, right? This is going to be so funny, and these people are great, and the whole movie is these two sort of fighting in a Chicago apartment, right? So numerous scenes of just fighting and yelling, and I don't recall much else. There's not a lot of chuck-a-luckin' going on. So this is an example where, and I know people that have seen this movie and then they came out the other side and were like, what? Like it, and this gets at someone else's question that we had this week. It doesn't give you that conventional ending you're expecting with the romantic comedy. It doesn't have the sort of lightheartedness that so many are known for. And so there's an example that just comes to mind immediately. But our gratification, think about a genre such as, there are some genres that are more distinct than others. So maybe a Western or a science fiction program, maybe a film noir, and these certain types of cinematic stories come with embedded expectations, right? I'm going to see certain types of scenery. There will be certain types of characters or setting. There's an overall ambiance that has expectations that we're looking for. We're anticipating them. And if they're not met, if they're not met in the right way, then we have that internal experience of perhaps being let down, or sometimes when we have a bit of innovation that takes place, we get new expectations, right? Are created, right, for future experiences. So our previous experience is usurped by new pleasures, new enjoyments. Okay, let's see here. According to Berger, page 39, in Media and Society, the other Berger text, science can be used for lying. And this is, the science of lying is key to, this was such an overwhelming area of interest. We bridged this into week 4 video discussion, so we are going to get a lot of mileage out of this phrasing, and that's good. It's good to locate themes, areas, parts of the text we are interested in that we can become invested in. And so we'll continue those discussions online. But in the meantime, as a society, why do you think we use signs for lying? Not a doctor of sociology, but we're just having a conversation here. This is just a discussion. Is this an accurate representation of the word lie, quote unquote, as it is presented in the book? This is great, right? That's an important point to make, since so many of you were picking up on that theme in the readings. Berger is being coy. There's a wry sense of humor to his writing style, and he's both being coy with what he says about lying and lies, or the way signs lie to us, but he's also telling a truth, okay? Because this gets into the messy, murky, but sometimes quite clear business of semiotics, that study of signs and symbols, of when we understand what signs and symbols are and how they function, and how they can both stand in for and sometimes replace our association with a thing or things, then we start to understand how they perform that business of even creating our perceptions of reality, right? Ooh, might have gone a little deep there with that response, but something to think about. What are some oppositions and or characteristics that can be seen between heroes and villains? Looking at page 48. And so one of the things that's important to recognize when we get into say areas reading about semiotics, but also the sort of theories behind that. All of storytelling is a matter of symbolic exchange, okay? And so a lot of these themes date back to core concepts in the history of Western civilization. And I'm sure they can go back much further, but we trace so many of our ideas to those origins because that was when they began documenting such information for future generations and cultures to consider. But there is one of the strong, even hardwired, as some recent researchers would suggest, some of the hardwired elements that we have a hard time letting go of is binary oppositional thinking, right? So encoding all symbol systems as binary, right? And we will continue to give examples here, but this is where we get the storytelling archetypes of the hero and the villain, all right? Because these are sort of polar opposites or binary opposites. They exist on the spectrum of good and evil, all right? And so you have these oppositions to one another, and they are going to create inevitable clash, okay? And then this is also where we get the dramatic, right, friction for narrative. All narrative is a form of storytelling, and so that's something to consider. If we think about it in the framework of our central text, the spy genre, and perhaps the text that Berger writes about a few times in 007, right, James Bond, you've got several Bond films feature binary opposition between the protagonist and the antagonist, between Bond and a central villain to the plot. And the first one that comes to mind is The Man with the Golden Gun. So this is a Roger Moore Bond film, early mid-70s, and in The Man with the Golden Gun, Christopher Lee, who many of you would recognize from a ton of different things, both before and after that, but he plays, I'm going to try to say it right, Francisco Scaramanga, something like that, and he is he's nothing if not a double to 007, right? He's kind of his oppositional self. He's like Bond, a perfect marksman, right? And they set this up brilliantly in the opening sequence of that film. I think that's as campy, as 70s heavy as that movie is. If you just think about what they're achieving through the storytelling, it's very effective. But not only do they show off his marksmanship in the opening sequence, but there's even the use of mirrors. All right, and this occurs both in that opening sequence, and it's part of the climactic conclusion to The Man with the Golden Gun. And so on one hand, mirrors and the way they're presented there get us thinking about funhouse mirrors or the sort of mirror mazes, but also mirrors are about reflection of self. And so I think a key takeaway there is that here we have both characters mirroring one another, right? They just happen to have oppositional ideologies. Bond is quasi-selfless. He's selfless in that his mission, his ideology is, as they say, as is often repeated, for Queen and country. Yeah. Whereas Scaramanga is the ultimate gun for hire, right? He's a hitman. So his code knows nothing except capital exchange and monetary gain, all right? And so that makes these fascinating dualistic characters. This is also a tension teased out in GoldenEye. It's teased out again in Skyfall, and even to an extent in Spectre. And I don't have a lot of time to go into them in this part of the series, but each of those films explore the binary opposition between central hero and villain, right? Friend and foe, if you will. So with that said, we'll take a quick break. We're on a short leash today, but we're going to work through some questions with part 2 of our week 4 asynchronous dialogue.